Well, good morning and welcome to Western Connecticut State University. We are happy to host gubernatorial candidates Rod Hanscomb and Mark Stewart this morning, and we are looking forward to hearing about their vision for Connecticut. My name is Keith Betts. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs, and it's an honor to be here today with you. At WCSU, we have two important core values that are relevant to today's events. These values are defined as the follows. Dialogue. We value the conversations that explore diverse perspectives and encourage shared understandings. Respect. We value the right of all people to be treated with dignity and fairness, and expect this in our policies, classrooms, and community. I anticipate that these values will be evident in the discussion today. I must note that the use of WCSU's facilities for this event does not constitute an endorsement by WCSU or the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. Neither the Connecticut State Colleges and Universities nor WCSU endorses any candidate or ballot measure in this or any other election. Per Board of Regents policy, all legally qualified candidates running for governor have been invited. Those who have accepted our invitation have been scheduled. And now to the candidates. Rod Hanscomb, Libertarian Party. Mr. Hanscomb graduated from Stanford High School in 1985. After graduating, he joined the military, spending 6 years active duty. During that time, he learned Russian, lived in Berlin, and saw the fall of the Berlin Wall and traveled the world. Upon leaving the service, he relocated to Seattle and worked while finishing a degree in international studies at the University of Washington. In Seattle, Mr. Hanscomb had a successful sales career, co-founding a food retail shop at Pike Place Market and a custom house boat building business. For those who have not been to Pike Place Market, keep your head down, the fish fly often. These pursuits in the private sector have allowed him to be able to dedicate his full-time pursuit of the office of Governor of Connecticut. Now to Mark Stewart, the Amigo Constitution Party. Mark Stewart is a businessman, former lawyer, and educator. During law school, he supported himself teaching SAT preps courses. He felt he could do a better job for students and founded a tutoring firm of his own in 2001. Since then, he has helped over 5,000 students enter competitive colleges. I hope WCSU is one of those, Mark.
We've got some of our alums here, yes.
His current business is educational excellence, which gives students more post-grad opportunities through outsourced in-school guidance counseling. Mark describes himself as a liberty-oriented Democrat. He is helping the Democratic Party return to tolerance and individualism. He will bring an NHL team back to Connecticut or not stand for re-election. Please give a warm welcome to both Rod Hanscomb and Mark Stewart. I will now turn it over to Dr. Howell Williams of the Political Science Program, who will moderate this event.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Vice President Betts, to President Clark for being here as well. This is an important event. This is an important election, and so I especially thank the two of you for joining us today. Glad to be here. The format for today is I will be asking the candidates 3 questions. I'll ask these questions of you individually, and then we will turn over to our audience for questions. Just going alphabetically, if that's okay, I will start with Mr. Hanscomb, the representative from the Libertarian Party. The first question I have for you is, what are the 3 issues that you see are the biggest issues you think facing Connecticut. And you can also sort of use the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Oh, no, of course, yeah. So my name is Rod Hanscomb. I'm the Libertarian candidate to be the next governor of the state of Connecticut. I'm from Stamford myself. After the introduction did it perfect, after graduating high school in Stamford, I spent 6 years in the military, got a chance to travel the world. And one thing that's so great about travel is, as important as university was, I think travel is as important myself. It really opens yourself up to the world. You realize how incredibly inaccurate, especially national news is when you travel, and you create your own perspectives. So one of the things that comes from is the perspective of what it was like when I left in 1985. When I left in 1985, before almost anybody in here was even around, Connecticut was on top. I mean, it was the #1 state in the country economically, reputation-wise, manufacturing, and otherwise. But I had the good fortune of living in Texas for a while, and then also in Washington State and Seattle for 22 years. And when you go to Texas and if you go to Washington, these are two of the highest growth states in the nation, and there's seemingly building cranes everywhere, construction on every block, things are booming, the new companies are just going there. But there's a reason why they're going there, and there's a reason why it's not happening here in Connecticut like it used to in the past. In 1991, the state of Connecticut enacted the income tax. So when I talk about not wanting the income tax, it's not just for me personally or just an emotional thing because I just feel that way. Forbes magazine recently did a very in-depth article, and they talked about what are the 10 fastest growing cities in America. 9 of the 10 fastest growing cities in America right now are in states with no income tax, and there's only 9 states that don't have an income tax. Now, out of those 9 cities, I dug deeper than Forbes did because I was like, well, what is the key to these 9 cities out of 10? And because, going to it, the statistical probability that that's just random is about 1 in a million, literally. So it's not just random, there's something that works in this. But digging deeper into that, out of those 9 cities, they're all in just 5 states. It's Washington, where I was living, Nevada, Texas, Tennessee, and Florida. And going even deeper into it, all 5 of those states have the exact same taxation model. They have no income tax, but they have high sales tax. The sales tax is typically 8.5% to 9.5%. So in the election, as Mayor Boughton from Danbury was a proponent of no income tax. Mr. Stefanowski, who's the Republican nominee, is a proponent of no income tax. But they talk about, hey, we'll phase it out in 8 or 10 years. Well, the reality of that is, who knows who's going to be in power in 8 or 10 years? It could be the Democrats back in power. So how are you realistically, planning on this 8 to 10 years out? Now, if you move to big revenue cuts with this state needs, the state of Connecticut does not have revenue problems. It has spending problems. So we need to cut spending, and we need to get rid of the income tax, go to a high sales tax, just like those high growth states do. The other 2 big things is going to be, one is big business regulations. After being a business owner in Washington and then coming to Connecticut, the amount of regulations that are out there for companies, and I can give numerous examples that other states just don't do, and most of it comes into politicians who sell themselves these labor unions. We're a right to work mentality here, so we're not pro-labor union for many reasons, but we need to have way less business regulations. And also the big thing, the biggest, second biggest issue that's out there is healthcare. Now, I know as younger people, you're probably not dealing with it too much, but for middle class these days, the cost of healthcare and the premiums has skyrocketed out of control. I mean, healthy middle class families with 4 individuals paying $1,600, $2,200 a month for healthcare. And when you go for healthcare, you think the procedure is going to be $600 and then you get a bill for $3,000. We all know it's out there. There's no other industry in the world that gets away with what the healthcare industry gets away with. Mark's in private industry, I'm in private industry. People have to know what the price is up front. So we would be all for price transparency, meaning when you go to the doctor, anybody goes to the doctor, they have to know what the cost is going to be up front, not 3 months later after you get your bill for 4 times more. And the reason for that is we see an enormous opportunity. As libertarians, we are a very true free market. We believe that there's a baseline that the government needs in order to operate, and anything above that just becomes waste and a drag on the free markets. So one of the opportunities out there with healthcare is, what if one state had you'll have to leave the government system of Medicare, Medicaid, it's too entrenched, and private insurance. But what if one state out there created a pathway or a separate track that was cash only? There's a phenomenon going on now. It's called direct primary care, where doctors who are operating on a cash-only basis, meaning they're so fed up with the system the way it is, they're going cash only. There's hospitals in Oklahoma that have done this also, where it's cash only. Their costs are 3 times less expensive than what any insurance program is, whether it's private or government. So what if one state out there aggressively went after this and became the beacon for cash-only, way less expensive health care? It could be an enormous boom for this state, and that's one of the things we're going to go after. Thank you.
The second question, you've touched on, I think, some sort of policy recommendations, but if you could speak, a lot of the students in the room are in a class on state and local politics, and we've talked a lot about the various branches of state government. Could you speak a little bit about specifically what the governor can do to address some of the issues that you've raised?
I think the number one thing in Connecticut is just efficiency. You know, coming from Seattle, you know, it was a great perspective, because if you're in Seattle, and you know, I came from the #1 housing market in the nation. Seattle is #1 for home appreciation, and Connecticut's number 50. It's literally the worst in the nation. It's one of the biggest economic indicators out there, is how much of your home is improving, how much is home value increasing, how much are people investing in your state. So, but one of the things is when you get with these technology companies, especially I use the Amazon example, I mean, one of the big reasons they're so successful is, and I know people personally in that company, is they scratch and claw for every fraction of a penny that's out there. And Einstein said, you know, the most powerful force in the universe is that of compounding numbers. So meaning the savings that become more savings on top of itself just create wealth. When you look at the government in Connecticut, and when you get involved and you know people that work in there, out campaigning and talking to literally tens of thousands of people, I've had my earful from people working inside who are so disgusted and fed up with the built-in inefficiencies that are out there. The amount of money that is just outright wasted, and I'll hit on that again. We don't have revenue problems in Connecticut. We have this second highest tax rate in the nation next to New York. We have spending problems, and one of the biggest issues out there is efficiency from the top all the way to the bottom.
Okay, great. And the final question is how can you or how can all of us work to get young people more involved in the political process?
That's a good question. You know, a lot of times I don't have the answer for everything. Part of, you know, politics is when I'm out there, there's thousands of issues out there, and these thousands of issues can have thousands of subtext to them. So I don't have the answer for, to be quite honest, what it would take to get more young people involved with politics. But the thing is, so often we think it's not important, like what is one vote really going to matter? I don't really like any of these politicians that are running anyways. None of them really motivate me. But the issue is, you know, in a state that has enormous economic issues out there, 4 years ago they said, hey, we had 50% voter turnout in 2014. Well, it was 50% of registered voters. And there's, you know, after campaigning and doing thousands of petition signatures, I know that somewhere between 12 and probably 15% of eligible voters aren't even registered. So that means in the 2014, in a state that last year was 49 out of 50 in economic growth, second only to Louisiana, worst in the country for home appreciation the last 5 and last 10 years, #1 per capita people leaving the state, you would think that there would be more people participating. But yeah, yet we only had 35%, so 65% of people are staying home. So it makes a big difference to get out there. If you're not in love with one of the candidates or one of us up here today, doesn't matter. Whoever you think is the best choice at a young age, just please get in the habit. I can implore you, please get in the habit of just being involved, because you'd be surprised how much a little bit makes a big difference in this game. So the other thing that happens, I'll wrap, why it's so important to vote, is what happens in Connecticut. And if you look at where the state budget is and why it gets so out of control, what happens is when only 35% of the people show up to vote, voter blocks become disproportionately powerful. So if a politician has the labor unions come to them and they'll say, hey, we're going to deliver the votes to you because we know between the Republicans and the Democrats, you're basically fighting over about a 2% here. Well, we have 4% of the state of Connecticut is in our labor unions. What if we deliver those votes to you? So if you sell yourself to that labor union, guess what you're doing after you're elected? You're paying them back. And if you look at the pension issues we have in this state, the inefficiencies that are in this state, how much it costs to repave these highways compared to every other state out there. If you think that a few percentage points doesn't make a big difference, in this game it makes an enormous difference. So once again, as young people, don't think it doesn't matter. It matters enormously. So please get out there and vote. If it's not for me, Who cares? Whoever you think is the best candidate out there, get involved early. You'd be surprised how much of a difference it's going to make.
Great. Thank you. I think we'll have more to discuss in a bit with questions from the audience. We'll turn now to Mark.
Same questions?
So the first question for you is, what are the 3 issues that you think are most pressing in the state of Connecticut?
All right, if you're students, so take notes. Number 1, choice. And we have a lack of choice in politics. Thank goodness that a few schools like yours will put Rod and I in front of you when there is a duopoly of Republican and Democrat that the media, they want to fixate on. They shouldn't, because there's far more ideas. You'll probably hear more today from Rod and I than listening to Bob and Ned for 5 straight debates, okay? You can survey at the end and let us know. Yet the media is focused on just the big players. Now, how unfortunate when even within the big Democrat Party, there's lots of points of view, and they limit people within. I am still a Democrat, registered, but I have my own party to represent a non-progressive group because the leaders of my party tend to be all progressive. So within the party, you've got progressives, you've got moderates, you've got almost anarchists. Within the big Republican Party, they're all over the place. I mean, they got the Tea Party people, they have social conservatives, they have corporatists, they have ones who are actually a lot like Hillary Clinton. They could have merged if they wanted to. They could have had not Trump and Hillary, but Clump. There's such a, among you, varied choice, I'm certain. But mainstream media doesn't make that really prominent. And this election, it is your turn. And it's your turn to maybe overturn a system that really doesn't serve us very well. You hear this all the time, that, gee, these 2 parties really aren't that responsive. Well, this is a chance to break through, and that's not just in Connecticut. We could start a wave here, that if little blue state Connecticut actually elects an independent, wow, wouldn't that start a nice cascade that goes back maybe even to California and Washington State? It is overdue, especially because, look, Rod and I both petitioned to get on the ballot. We spoke with, look, for me it was almost 20,000 people. We had to get 7,500 names, but you got to talk to a lot of people. Still say, nah, not for you. So I have a pulse of what people tend to agree with. See if you're in the same pulse. At least 70%, and it's probably 90% if you're under 25, would say, I'm socially liberal, but fiscally tight. How many of you are characterized that way? Socially liberal, let the government get out of the way. Fiscally tight because it's your money or your parents' money. Now, if you feel that way, I think at least 70% of Connecticut people feel that way. Rod and I represent that, but we've never had a major party candidate that represents it. Never! There's left and left, and there's right and right. And that, to media, a confusing middle, which I think is where you all lie, doesn't get played up. All right, second is business freedom. There are too many regulations on a business growing. If you or a relative have been cut on hours to just 29 hours a week. Why? Obamacare, a government regulation that says the employer who now faces somebody who goes to 30 hours a week, regulated more, costs more. What happens to you? You want to build a career. You don't build a career on 29 hours a week. 40 hours a week, or maybe even more. You put in overtime to build up your ascent. Everyone professionally who's at a high place didn't just work 40 hours a week. They put in 50 or more, right? So the ACA, that's Obamacare, is a lack of freedom on some of the people who need it the most. In the name of government, they squash people who want to start careers. Third one, Professor, would be personal freedom. It's a huge issue. Why should the government be involved? If you want to light up and you're not harming anybody else, the right of an adult to do weed in their home or even in a bar that is safe shouldn't be messed with the government. Fight real crime is what I say. Fight the crimes that are cyber crimes that really do hurt other people. If we stopped putting detectives into vice squads for what should be legal, by the way, one reason that marijuana is a Schedule I illegal drug is racist. And it goes back to the Richard Nixon administration, law and order candidate in the 1970s. And he perceived that the races who might be somewhat lawless, they're also doing weed. We have to eliminate that. And how do I reinforce that? What's the other Schedule I drug that at the same time was made illegal, or made Schedule I? Peyote. Harmless, okay? Has even less effect than marijuana, but they classified it there too. Why? Because Latinos and Native Americans in the Southwest were lighting that up too. Terrible reasons for making law. Personal freedom should be expanded. My Democrat Party used to believe in that. We don't anymore. You could help get that back.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the follow-up to that is, what can the governor do to address some of the issues that you've raised?
An independent is the one candidate, okay, whether that's Rod or me, maybe Oz, we're the only ones that can make a substantial change. Why? Ned is tied. Okay, he's tied to promises that he's made to urban groups, to labor groups, to teacher unions. Bob is somewhat tied too, okay? If elected, none of them can make a substantial change. And as Rod's pointed out, we need a substantial change. We are, I think, at the top end of a vortex, okay? I won't go too much deeper, but a vortex like your toilet, okay? When it gets lower and lower and lower, it gets swifter and swifter before you go down. Why does that vortex happen economically? Because in Connecticut especially, when the people who have means to pay taxes are the only ones being taxed, and it has to go higher and higher for the welfare state that my Democrat Party tends to propose, we end up bringing in more people who need stuff. They don't necessarily want to work, or they can't work, and we pay them anyway, and fewer people who actually earn money want to stay. Hence the exodus to South Carolina and Florida with low taxes. It's been called a death spiral, and it is realistic. We're not in that yet. I think we're near the top of it, and making a change that is substantial. So what can a governor do? I do what Bob asks, faster. Okay, everyone I think knows, in 2 words, what does Bob Stefanowski want? It is, 2 words. Wow, you haven't listened to his ads.
Lower taxes.
Lower taxes, all right, that's about all you hear, okay? If he's not at the debate, he just said all he would have said, okay? So you didn't have to invite him. That's all he says. Now, it's an important message, and I reinforce that. I say lower taxes faster. His plan is to reduce taxes in 8 years. It is a good idea, but it's not good enough. Mine is 3 years. 3 and out. Because if you do it in 3 years, every year is substantial. The impact of a 30% tax cut in year 1 is meaningful. By year 2, it's what's going to bring in new businesses. CEOs that say, whoa, I could be paying so much less. It'll be 100% after year 3. I want to move my business here, at least a couple divisions here. Individuals will come here. And the reason you can do 3 and out, Ned will say, oh, you can't do that. Yes, you can, if you can go back to what the real functions of a state government are. Necessary things. Welfare is not a necessary thing. It's a nice thing. And the best people to do nice things, like welfare, helping homeless people, helping rehab the Long Island Sound, helping alcoholics get off their problem. It's not the state government. It's you and your family, and maybe municipalities, and maybe organizations, organized charities. Charities can be more moral than the state government. It's the right place for welfare, especially because then we control whether that homeless shelter is really doing a good job. All right, I gave them money last year, but they're doing a lousy job. I'm not giving them money next year. State government, it doesn't work like that. You can't turn that ship around. Oh, we funded them like this. We have to give that plus 5%. There's no stopping it. So you end up with misaligned recipients of your money. You can be moral with your money, and if you cut taxes, you will have that morality or more dollars with it. Also, it would validate Bob and even validate me to see, say, Connecticut's economy really does rocket up in 2 or 3 years following 30% and then 34% tax cuts. You could attribute it to a tax cut. Bob wouldn't be able to do that if he's only cutting 10% the first year, 12% the second year. It wouldn't make a monumental increase. So, who is the only type of candidate who could get a General Assembly to go along? Okay, they're the ones in the way. Okay, they've been at it decade after decade. Malloy, by the way, is fiscally not bad. He's gotten a bad name. But Dan Malloy has right-sized the pensions. He's not been horrible. He's had some liberal spasms. But generally, he's not been fiscally bad. Who has been? Bob's party. Governor Rell, Governor Rowland, Governor Weicker. They never met a bond measure they didn't like. What's a bond measure? Bond is, we're going to spend money now, and you'll pay for it. You, the younger generations, never met a bond measure they didn't like, paid oodles of salaries and pensions and health care benefits to state workers. That's bankrupting you too. So the independent, who is not tied, Rod and I don't make these big promises to big groups. So let's say one of us does get elected. Holy cow, the General Assembly has to follow. Because if an unheralded Mark Stewart got 51% of the vote, who's he? 51% of people figured out that he's for something that means big change. General Assembly has to follow. They cannot be in the way, because within 2 years, if they are in the way, bye-bye. That governor, Mark Stewart, will point out everyone who's in the way of progress. That's how an independent can make a difference.
Great. And the final question's the same about getting young people more involved in the political process.
My favorite. You guys under 25 don't vote enough. You don't. As a cohort, now maybe I'm looking at an exclusively different class of students here, but what's the ratio of 18 to 25-year-olds that exercise their right to vote? It's like 22%. Anyone know the ratio of 85-year-olds voting? It's like 90%. They always vote. They don't have much else to do. Okay? And they pay attention to the news, too. Okay? They're the ones listening to talk radio. They watch CBS. You guys don't. And you could end up being very influential if you'd exercise that right to vote. And by the way, it does hurt you. There's so many systems, and if you look at my site, stewartforliberty.com, it shows how many government systems disserve younger people. Why would politicians do that? Because when the 80-year-olds have different interests than the 30-year-olds, and the 80-year-olds vote, they're going to listen to the 80-year-olds. You guys lose out. So when I say it's your turn to overturn, I mean it. And I hope you will, before you leave the building today, go to stewartforliberty.com, Google it, and tell your family members that there are candidates here today, Rod and I, that could really make an overturn and make it possible. So look, if you haven't been paying too much political attention, young people have like 53 Twitter feeds. Okay, how about devote 5 of them to good political talk? How about 1 to Rod's feed, 1 to mine, 1 to Ned's, 1 to Bob's, and how about at Yankee Institute? They're right on most issues. You start doing that, you're politically attuned, and your vote goes to the right place.
Great. Thank you. I think there's a lot there to digest. I will reserve my own questions and would open the floor up to our audience to see what questions are out there.
Anything, please, yeah. We'll take any topics.
Well, let me just add to one last thing. If you do vote even twice in this decade, you will have voted more than Bob Stefanowski. Okay. All right, there was a question.
Yes, so Mark, you spoke a little bit about social welfare, and I may not know exactly how to ask this question, but where do you both, I guess, stand on social welfare about maybe supporting, mental illness or all the funds that go to all of what is social welfare in Connecticut?
Yeah, so when it comes to the budget, so often in the debates when you see the Democrats and Republicans, when they're asked the hard questions, what do you usually see? You see the pattern of they prefer to talk about how horrible the other guy is rather than really digging into the meat of the issues out there. So one thing we pride ourselves on in the Libertarian Party is when we're asked the tougher questions, like this can be one of them, is this is exactly what we think. But here's why we think that. It's not just an emotional thing. It's not an emotional thing. Here's the reasons why. So the state budget in Connecticut is about $20 billion. Now, almost 20% of that goes to welfare and social services. And when you look at it right now, let's be honest, we're almost at a full employment right now. Everybody I know who really wants a job has a job. We also need to look at geographically, half the state is commutable to New York City. There's 4 million private sector jobs in New York. Over the years, I've just seen the amount of people that do not need these programs. They're on it because when these programs were started by Lyndon Johnson in the mid-1960s, before the mid-1960s, families and communities handled their own business. The government didn't have to do it. But there was a big paradigm shift in the mid-1960s. It was Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. And that's when subsidized housing and food stamps and welfare all came into play. Well, since 1969, all the way to the present day, the government has run federal budget deficits almost every year except for 2 years during the Clinton administration. And we're one of only 2 nations of the world can get away with this. It's us and England are the only nations of the world get away with this kind of budget. And it could put our country at peril one day, and you'll be the ones paying for this later. First of all, I know if I was going to guess, I would say probably 85% of the people that are collecting social services don't need it. They're fully capable of going out there and getting jobs. Now, this is backed up because another article that came out in Forbes magazine is the state of Maine, welfare and social services was getting so out of control that the governor finally said, that's it. Say, if you're collecting, here's what's going to happen. You're either going to work 20 hours a week, you're going to do 16 hours of community service per month, or you're going to go to tech school and we're going to pay for it. It seems like very, very realistic things to ask for people that are able-bodied, which the vast majority of people on social services are able-bodied. Okay, out of that, 88% of the people dropped out of the program. So often when liberals, I'll say, not so much as an attack, but in politics and in issues, we need to dial down the emotion and look at the facts and the reality of what's really happening out there. So right off the bat, that's the number one thing we will go after is welfare and social services. And yes, we would follow Maine's example to the T, that if you're getting services and you're an able-bodied person, you're not sitting home and just collecting checks while the rest of us have to pay the bill for it. You're going to either go to tech school and we'll train you to do something, you're going to work 20 hours a week, or yes, you'll just have to do 16 hours of community service per month.
But wouldn't you first have to learn how to speak English? I mean, we have a major functional literacy problem in this country. So how are you going to get people to go to work if they can't read?
I go to New York City all the time, and there could be 500,000 people in New York City that don't speak English very well, and I see them working all the time. So yeah. I don't see that as an excuse. So.
Because I mean, if you look at the SAT scores in this state,
right.
Places like Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury are like 400, and yet people in New Canaan are like 600. So how would you equalize that so people have a better chance of...
Is it the government's responsibility to teach people how to learn English? I mean, if you want to learn, isn't it out there, especially just with internet access and all the tools that are out there? So.
I'll ask that the audience raise your hand and we'll call on you. We don't have any problem with that. I'd just like to get Mark's response to the question about social services and mental health.
So your question on social welfare is good. You clearly have a passion. I would like you to be in control of social welfare. You to decide where funds go, you to decide who's deserving and who's not, instead of the government deciding, because the government doesn't decide very well. First off, they decide in part based on patronage, that's political promises to friends. Second off, they don't even read long bills. Okay, things get passed. Do you remember a year and a half ago? They passed a bill to bail out Hartford. Then this year, the money actually came due. And the Republicans in the General Assembly said, oh, we don't know what we just did. Okay, that's dumb government. And it can't be straightened out completely. But if you really cut down the scope of government to, as I say, the necessary services, and leave the nice services, and social welfare is nice, the nice services will get done better. Now, in terms of empathy, I think you have extraordinary empathy for some people who are needy. I do too. Ned Lamont does too. He even talks about that. Ned's a nice guy. It's dangerous to govern by empathy, because then you're governing based on feelings. I feel for that group. And you're governing based often on images. I would rather govern based on wisdom. And the wisdom of individuals to fund what they want to fund. Some things will get funded more. They deserve to be funded more. It's really like a free market in charity. Free markets are excellent. Free markets are why our economy is so good in everything else. Why not leave that to charity? And, meaning, let all these social programs have a place on a state website that says, look how much they spend, look how many people they help, look what they do with money. It's a big GoFundMe. That's the most democratic way of funding charities. And here's what's very undemocratic. I have empathy, too, for people who are taxed against their will to pay for the legislator's will. That, to me, I have especially empathy for the marginal family, where that extra 7% puts them from saving for private school, or maybe starting a business on their own, or just plain making a mortgage payment that might be pressing after they had a car accident. I have empathy for that. If you reduce the scope of government and let everybody have their 7%, I'd go further. I'd like to do it on the federal tax code too. We got to talk with Donald Trump first for that. But when you have a lot more money, you can fund the social welfare the way you want.
Other questions? Yeah,
First off, Mr. Hanscomb, thank you for your service. I too actually am a veteran here.
Very good, thank you.
My unit's in Danbury. So I guess my kind of question, it ties into a little bit of the social services and things like that. So when you're looking at veteran services and the VA, I actually work with Commissioner Tomasati.
Okay.
And so I've read things about Senator Murphy really trying to focus and hone in on the issues that veterans face. Now, does that tie into, I'm from New York, so I don't really know too much about services given here at the state level, but when you look at that as the governor and tie into social services, where does that all play into sort of that realm that you could?
Yeah, because me myself, as a libertarian, I'll just add real quick is libertarians. One of the things we believe in is we believe in the government. Our federal government's involved in too many foreign entanglements we don't belong in. So I'm not anti-military myself. I was in the U.S. military for 6 years, and if you're in the military, be surprised how many of the service members actually have that same mentality. We're here to defend the country, not go looking for battles that aren't ours to be fought. So one of the first things I would like to see, honestly, federally, is that we have less veterans to begin with. We take on the battles that need to be had, but we don't go looking for the battles just to keep the U.S. military-industrial complex going. Getting to these issues, though, I have to be very honest myself, is that from my perspective, I served during the first Persian Gulf War, but I was in a location, I was not in harm's way. I've never even stepped foot inside a VA hospital before. So unlike a lot of veterans who run and you hear about the things they've been through, I luckily myself was not in that same position. But this is a federal issue. I mean, there's federal issues and there's state issues. So anything that happens through military, whatnot, has to be paid for by the federal government because our taxes go to that location first and then it gets dispersed to the military. So as the governor, I guess I've heard from many veterans as far as the issues they have. So as the governor, we need to be a proponent for them. We need to fight for them. But to be honest, it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to open up the coffers because the federal government, it's my belief, it's their responsibility.
I could address it at the state level for two issues for vets. One is another example of a government screw up. I can't attribute it to anything else. A month from now, I'll be running some race. I'm not a good athlete, but I decided to start running at the Rocky Hill Veterans Home. So I was there last year for the first time. I asked, how many vets live here? Well, they're down to only 25% capacity. They have room for literally 75% more older men who have low incomes and need a home other than, grandma's place, it's where they end up going. They raised the rate 2 years ago, like 58% higher suddenly. Your rent just went up. It was subsidized. Why make people go away with an oppressively high rent and still have empty space? It's one thing if there's some market forces that would fill the space at 100% rate. They don't do that. So they just gave veterans and their families the shaft. Another thing is the VA hospitals could end up giving more choice. You'll hear choice a lot from me. Right now, vets can only go to VA hospitals for certain treatments. But what if a better hospital, a private hospital, is not that far away and can serve you better? Why not take a voucher? We owe the vets some money. There's maybe $20,000 over 5 years that you can use. You be the judge of when and where you use it, and use it at St. Francis Hospital, or use it at one of the Waterbury hospitals, and not be stuck at a VA hospital that might not be serving you so well.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, in the back, Elijah.
So as a student here, my life will be revolved around this school for the next couple of years. I was just wondering if there's anything specifically that would help, if you guys were to get elected, that would change my experience being in school.
What's your bad experiences now? My sense is college is pretty good.
Class, so
Aside from his class.
don't want to get
But if you could fill us in on what's negative now, because for me, college was awesome. And that's what most, I think, young people do get to experience. Let us hear about your not-so-good experience.
If I had to really put it into like a more simple term, I'd say my biggest problem would just be money. Either collecting money, because I mean at this school I end up spending a lot of money. Simply whether it's on things that I need like books or something like that because I didn't get accepted for whatever grant or loan or whatever else, or maybe it's just that I need certain food and I just couldn't get it from somewhere else. You know what I'm talking about? It's just expenses here and there.
We've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Just add up to it.
What's your major?
JLA, Justice Law Administration.
Okay. Private industry might fund you better, and I'm in favor of that. They certainly would fund you well in the free market of student loans. We don't have a free market. We have a government student loan authority that's not very good. If you're a science major, I know you'd get funded. If you're diligent, like you seem, and you're in a good major where there will be earnings prospects, there's an investment opportunity for me and other people to fund your education. We don't have that regimen right now. If we had a different kind of student loan program, it would be very good. Now, I'm glad you said a reasonable major. You do have good opportunities. If you had told me, I'm majoring in Bulgarian poetry, then I'd say, sir, you're in a luxury. And I'm not asking anyone, private investors, if they really want to, fine. Public, no, because you don't have good earning opportunities after that. So if we can change the priorities for funding, I think it would really help. Now, I want you to recognize that for all your press to fund maybe $10,500 a year plus expenses, your university is funding almost double that to educate you. The actual cost is over $20,000. So please recognize that you have a privilege right now and feel good about taking advantage that right now state is funding students pretty well. It may mean kids have to start school later. You earn for 3 years. Come to school at age 21 instead of 18. I think it's very good for men who are at 18 often just boys and not all that mature in the first place. If you're 18 and mature and have a stash, great. work at having a stash, take a retail job, take a manufacturing job. For God's sakes, we got a labor problem. You'll get skills. You'll come back here with a focus. I think your president and vice president like that kind of student because you won't fish around for 2 years. What do I want to get out of WCSU? You'll be riveted. You might get out in 3 years instead, and no matter what, you'll have some bank saved up to get you home.
Oh, no, sure, I'll add to that. One of the things for education I've seen, first of all, Connecticut does a fantastic job with the state universities, the community colleges, the University of Connecticut system that's out there. If you want to get a great education, it is out there to be had. And the taxpayers of the state are probably funding, and I can be correct or not, probably in the neighborhood of 60% of what happens is funded by the taxpayers. So is that correct or not? So about so. No, it's not 3%, it's 60%, yeah. If you looked at what the market rate would be to go to this school, it's not what I saw what the tuition is. It's not what it is, it would be much higher. That being said, is that one thing I saw in Europe and one thing I saw in Washington State that has cut down radically on the cost of higher education is by the time somebody is 16 years old, we really, at that point, you really have a pretty good feeling whether they're on the 4-year university track, which is only about 30% of us. Only about 30% of the population is on the 4-year university track, and that's about all we need. It's probably more than we actually need, and there's about 70% that really should be on the trade school track. And if you saw what's out there as far as opportunities for kids that are 18, 19 that come out with skills, there's a lot of great jobs to be had out there right now. So first of all, I would look at the European model and the Washington State that did this. At the age of 16, you can start taking community college classes right inside a high school in the state of Washington. So many kids who know that they're going on the 4-year university track, they get out after their senior year, their first 2 years of school is already done. Kids that go into the trade school track, they're getting out at the ages of 18 and 19 and they're finding out, wow, there's jobs out there that really pay $15, $20, $25 an hour when you're 19 years old, and it's just up from there. So that's one of the things I would really consider that could really make a big difference on making university more affordable so you don't have to carry as much debt forward. But that being said, I believe students should have a vested interest in the cost. I mean, I had to work while I was going to school in the military and afterwards. And I think there's just something better when you have a vested interest rather than it's handed to you for free completely. So.
A few more questions from the audience.
First and foremost, thank you for attending.
Thank you.
I just have a question regarding, there's like an overarching, there's kind of like an overarching narrative that there needs to be like an invitation to businesses to invest more in Connecticut. And I've heard this from like quite a lot of candidates so far. And I just want to know specifically like in this era in which precedents set by like, for example, Citizens United versus FEC, and a lot of different legislation that's like demonstrating the dangers of privatization at the corporate level. How do you protect corporate rights while simultaneously inviting big business to come back to Connecticut?
Good.
I don't feel there are big dangers at the corporate level compared to the dangers at the government level. I'll say that again. The dangers of reliance on government far exceed the dangers on reliance on corporations. And I do not say that corporations are moral. What keeps corporations in line? The free market. The choice that you have to do something with your money when a corporation is abusive. 3 months ago, I run a small company, and a few of us now start to need Ubers or Lyfts, okay? Well, that was about the time that it came out that Uber at the managerial level was slamming down women, okay? That their women weren't promoted as well, they were treated to abuse. Guess what I got to do? My company was on the verge of doing an Uber contract. We did Lyft instead. When I found out that ESPN outsources jobs, actually Disney, ESPN's a part of it, and I love ESPN. But I'm no longer an ESPN watcher because of Disney's predations on American workers. They basically were asking their IT people to train Filipinos and Chinese. Not Chinese Americans, Chinese, Filipino, so that they would outsource their jobs. I have the choice of turning off ESPN. I'm running for governor in part to put out choices that are good and bad. That smorgasbord I was talking about, I think the state does have some imprimatur. I hope one of us becomes governor so that we can say, this is a corporation that has done some depredations. These are the facts. You decide. But the beauty of you decide, that you have the power to improve a company that's doing good and to not improve a company that's doing evil, is a wonderful thing. I would not want to put all the reliance in government instead.
And one of the things I'll add again is one of the perspectives I had that I think makes me unique is from the other candidates is having the opportunity to live once again in the high growth states of California, Texas, also Washington for 20 plus years. And for many, many years, even right now, Seattle is still one of the top growing economies in the nation. And when you're there as a business person, individual, you see what's working. So 7 years ago, let's say maybe a house cost $250,000. Now it costs $750,000 in that city. Traffic is exponentially worse than what it was before, and it's more expensive, yet people keep moving there. And you're wondering, why would people keep moving there? Well, what happens is that when you have a state that does not have income tax, like Washington State does, well, if you're a high-tech worker in Silicon Valley in California, or you work for a biotech company, and you're making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, these kind of jobs are not that uncommon these days if you have the right skills and are in the right situation, the right company. So if you're in the state of California, once you hit $500,000 per year, your income tax goes from 9% income tax to 13%. So basically, over $500,000, you're paying the state of California $65,000. Well, a company in Seattle can say, well, how about you relocate your business and or even your staff up to Washington State, and guess what? You're going to have $65,000 more in your pocket. So a lot of times what happens is you'll say, well, that's unfair. It's unfair that we don't tax wealthy people enough. It's unfair that businesses don't get taxed enough. Well, all of us in this room, after the age of 5, you realize, hey, life isn't always fair, so we have to look at what actually works out there and what are going to be the right incentives to get businesses to come. So for every high-wage job that's created, it's not just that job. In economics, there's the jobs that are created around it. For every high-wage job, let's say a $100,000 job, there's 2.5 to 3 jobs that are created around it. So when you give the brakes and you have growth, you can grow your way out of problems. And that's what we can do in Connecticut. But Connecticut, we don't think about how are we going to grow our way out of these problems. We always think about how can we get more revenue and keep spending more money. Well, it just doesn't work. There's a reason why we're coming in almost dead last in all these economic categories. Until we make fundamental changes and look at and live in the land of reality, what's really working out there, nothing's going to change here.
Right, thank you. I think we have time for a final thought or a couple final questions. Please.
The Danbury area being a border area, where do both of you stand on tolls?
Can I go first this time?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm against tolls 100%. You know, the average cost to repave 1 mile of highway for 1 lane is about $200,000 across the country. And Connecticut comes in at over $500,000. So like everything else that happens in Connecticut, everything is just more expensive. And it's more expensive because of inefficiency and waste. This state just wastes money. I have a very good friend that works in the Department of Transportation. He's a go-getter, and I'm surprised they've been able to keep him for so long. He just bemoans the culture in there, bosses that have bosses that don't do anything, committees that have committees, endless environmental reviews just to repave highways that we already have when cars burn 20 times cleaner than they did 40 years ago. So with the tolls, all of these tolls, when you look at it, this is not Massachusetts they're talking about where it's 4 cents a mile. All of these proposals have been 20 cents a mile. So if you're living in a different part of the state, because I live in Fairfield County, there's more money flowing in this area than there are in other parts of the state. So let's say you live in Norwich, an economically depressed town, and you commute to New Haven and back. Well, that's going to cost you $475 a month just in the toll to commute to work and back. Well, if you have a spouse that works in New London, you drive around on the weekend, families could be paying upwards of $800 a month for these tolls. So we get caught up in the emotion once again of, well, I have to pay a toll when I go to Massachusetts, I got to pay tolls when I go to New York, and their highways are absolute garbage. So why don't we have tolls? Because it's not fair. Well, once again, if you think that that's not going to be another driver to just have people keep leaving this state, put tolls in, and we're just going to compound the problems we already have.
I'd like to give a third-way perspective. Tolls are needed only if we need more money. Rod and I contend that we don't need more money. We need to spend less, and you can have more money. If you absolutely got into such a dire situation in Connecticut that we really need to spend more money, I do believe in user fees. I think it's a relatively good way to raise revenue compared to an income tax, which is a horrible way to raise revenue. By the way, the worst is Social Security. Okay, that is the worst tax. It is the most regressive. Why? Social Security, which we've bought into for so damn long. Social Security taxes people only up to the first $106,000 of income, and you're taxed at 15.5%. Okay, I could do a lot with 15.5%. I might be able to get a mortgage. I could put kids in private school, but it gets sucked away. The person who earns $600,000 a year, he's only taxed on the first 106. His Social Security tax rate is only 3.2%. How unfair is that? Now I'll go further. If you're African American, you should be irate at the Social Security system because it's triply unfair. Black people tend to work longer. They pay into the system longer, and because of life expectancy tables tend to get out less. Okay? Average life expectancy, it's not my fault, but black American male, it's only 66.5 years. You retire at 65, you can take out for a year and a half on average. Okay? Average white person lives to about 73.5. Okay? They're taking out 5 times longer. That's manifestly unfair. So the best type of system, I think, is you pay for what you use, and tolls are a manifestation of it, but I do not think we need them. There's a better way. I'll take some time afterwards if you want to hear the better way.
I still say you can't make that point on race. I think you should make the point on smoking. 40% of the people were smoking back in the 70s. Now it's 13%. That is what's increasing life expectancy. That's what's making the pension system go nuts. Because people were not supposed to live this long under the old system. True. And it's smoking that you have to do.
You're right. When they created the 65 age back in the 30s, the average life expectancy then was 63. Yeah. Okay, it was for people who had outlived their work experience.
They were chewing tobacco. They were doing all these things to lower their lifespan.
Now they're not. Let's get one last comment from Elijah. Yeah, please.
Hello. So, as I said, coming soon, I'll be leaving the school, hopefully graduating, and I was wondering, if elected, what would make me start setting roots in Connecticut instead of leaving as you guys, I'm not looking for anything specific per se, but just to let me know who you guys are pretty much.
And I'll start. Yeah, and the best opportunities need to be here in the state. I mean, how many of us know, and I just hear it so often, friends and family and coworkers, oh, my son lives in North Carolina. My son lives in Reno, Nevada. My daughter moved out to Phoenix. They're living in San Francisco because the go-getters are always going to go to where the opportunities are. In Connecticut, we do have opportunities. I'm not saying it's completely dire, but it's not at the same level that it is in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Austin, Texas, or Denver, Colorado, or Seattle, Washington, or the Bay Area, or Los Angeles, or go on and on. There's Nashville, other cities are just happening more, and there's reason why they're happening more. So we have to create an environment where there's opportunities are here, and we are in a phenomenal location geographically to be sandwiched on the eastern seaboard right next to New York City and in between Boston with the universities, the amount of money, the history that's in this area. There's no reason the best opportunities should be here. So you don't have to feel after the state of Connecticut pays a good chunk of your education that then you leave and we get nothing in return. We want you to stay here. We want this to be the place where the opportunities are and where people are coming from other states here, not vice versa.
Elijah, I see 2 types of 20-somethings. There's a type that really want to stay here, and I actually think Connecticut, even now, before we become governors, is pretty darn good, okay? Because by contrast, you want to go to Brooklyn, you'll pay $1,500 a month for half of the space that you would in Connecticut at $700 a month. You'll be taxed at 9% in addition. That's the New York City tax. You will not make money. You might have fun, okay? You might. But responsible, sober people who actually want to start in Connecticut now actually will make bank. And 10 years from now, your friends who then come back, well, I did Chicago for a decade and I'm poor now. And you're going to have a house, okay? And so it is wise to stay. But here's the other group. And you're the group that I can't stop you. If you want to be on Broadway, don't go to New London, okay? You're not going to have anything like it. If you want to be in Silicon Valley, there's nothing in Connecticut that would keep you here. Go! And I was one of those people, and it wasn't for the career. I just wanted to get away. I went to law school in California. Because, like Rod, we probably wanted to get away from our parents. And I liked my parents. But if there were no Pacific Ocean, I would have gone even further. You have an inkling to be away. But here's the message I have for the 30-somethings. That's you in 15 years, or that's people who are in Connecticut thinking of leaving, or people who are abroad now that might want to come back to better schools for their kids, lower taxes than in New York or Boston, lower cost of living, better space, and a better situation. So I'm not going to try to rein in that many 20-year-olds when you want to go. But I do think Connecticut will be a great place for young couples in their mid-30s.
Great. Well, because of time, we've taken enough of your time this morning. I hope you will all join me in thanking our guests for this morning. And thank you all for coming. Thanks a lot.